Many years ago, a biology student was working in a lab. She was helping them clean out their freezer when she came upon a package wrapped in plastic. It was a frozen, skinned coyote head. No one knew where it came from or how long it had been there. Most likely it was left there by a student that had long since graduated. It was decided that it was going to be thrown away, so she asked if she could keep it instead. It became one of her first skulls. As the flesh had fallen away, an interesting pattern of marks came to light. A groove was worn down the center of a pair of his back teeth. The same groove was worn against the backs of his canines. The grooves were worn into the pulp cavity of the tooth. Damage like that would have been extremely painful and infected, but there was no sign of infection there. When she closed the jaw, the grooves on the molars formed a near-perfect circle. She noticed that there was a direction to the abrasions. Whatever he had been chewing on had tension to it. It had wrapped around his teeth. The abrasions were all the same diameter, just a little larger than a cell phone charge cord. It was a cable. He had been caught in a snare. A snare is basically a zip tie made of wire, designed to tighten around the neck as the animal struggles, strangling it. But something had happened here. Maybe it wasn't very tight, or maybe an object was looped into it. Maybe it was caught around his leg instead. Somehow he was able to get his jaws around the wire. The back and forth motion of his head had worn grooves into his teeth. Based on the depths of the grooves, he'd been at it for a long time. Definitely a night, maybe even an entire day or more. His mouth was probably badly cut. Had he had more time, infection would have set in, marking the bone. He never had that time. Forgotten in the back of a freezer, waiting to be told, was a story of perseverance, struggle, and the desperate will to survive, etched into the trajectory of abrasions. This story was over before it began. A tale of tragedy we cannot affect or change, but we tell it anyway. We tell it because the power of a story is not in the ending, but in what the journey brings to life. Just a few moments ago, as we have done every service and will continue to do beyond foreseeable reach of time, we shared our joys and sorrows. We told the small stories of our lives. Why? There are easy answers. It feels good to be embraced. It feels good to pour out the uncontainable sorrow or joy and allow others to uplift it, to share the load. Because that is the way. Because it is a sacred act. But why? Because stories have power. We share stories to allow ourselves to be witnessed. We share stories to learn. We share stories because stories give value to us, to each other, to the subject. We share stories because beyond all else, it is a practice worth doing. I was recently in St. Louis for some medical trauma training. I worked a week of night shifts at the St. Louis Hospital ER. One night, a young man came in, younger than I am, with 6 gunshot wounds. We did all we could. We opened his ribs and manually pumped his heart. We pushed 3 bags of blood. But he had coded 30 seconds from our trauma bay door. And all of our efforts were too little, too late. And so we cleaned up. We began preparing his body to go to the morgue when a woman in a stole stepped up beside the bed. "Let us take a minute," she said, just like that. The room stopped and fell still and silent. We give thanks for this young man and for his life, as we give thanks for the good work of those who cared for him and his final moments. May peace find him and his family. For a moment, he came alive again. For a moment, his spirit swelled to fill us all. For that moment, we were allowed to witness him once more, as fully human, as fully complex, and as fully realized as he was in every word and breath and deed and life. In that moment, his story was ignited within our hearts, and we were able to tell it again. Not just in the form of better procedures, ambulance routes, and practices, but in order to give value to him, to hold him in all that he was, and see each other human reflected back. We may not all have lived that precise experience, but there is only a rare few blessed people who haven't been to a wake or a funeral, and that is the same. We stand and witness to a life profound and deep. We gather to give value to a human who we may not have known well, or who may have been our dearest love. We do this even if we did not love them, even if we did not know them, because it is an act worth doing. We stand in those overwarm, soft-carpeted rooms, cushioned by the fuzzy whispers of clusters of people around us. We stand and witness and share in that space because that is someone's final story. The story of their journey back to the earth, back to ash or dust, back to the stars and the universe that bore them, that bore us all. We tell stories to witness. Hannah Gadsby has a show on Netflix titled Net. If you haven't seen it, please find a moment when you are feeling strong and watch it, because it shows in real time the power of a story. Hannah begins with a regular comedy routine, self-deprecating humor about her weight, her sexuality, her appearance, what you expect from any comedian. But that's not where she stays. She begins to push back. She begins to stand up for herself. She tells her story not just for laughs, but to be witnessed. It is a story that is difficult and heartbreaking and painful. These half-truths she used to tell for laughs are pulled up from their soil, a network of roots, scars that reveal the truth. The awful, aching truth. She says, I tell you this because my story has value. My story has value. I tell you this because I want you to know. I need you to know what I know. I will not allow my story to be destroyed. What I would have done to have her story like mine. Not for reputation, not for money, not for blame, not for power, but to feel less alone, to feel connected. I want my story heard. I just needed my story heard. My story felt and understood. Because like it or not, my story is your story. She goes back to an earlier story she told about Vincent van Gogh. She says that we have the gift of his work because he had a brother who loved him. Through all the pain, he had a tether, a connection to the world. And that is the focus of the story that we need, connection. That is the power of a story. The power to make us feel connected, to make us feel heard, to make us feel valued, because we are valuable, each and every one of us, so precious. And we need to tell our stories because that is how we form a human race, a human kind. That is how we mend the rifts and bear witness and be vulnerable to the tragedy and suffering of each other. That is how we gain perspective and how we learn that we are normal and that we are present in so many ways and we are not alone. It is through the gift of story, true and real and sometimes unhappy story, that we learn what it means to be human. To be a part of this great human race. Humanity is nothing but the collection of millennia of stories all coming together, woven into the fabric of us all, into our DNA, our history. The human race is nothing more or less than the summation of every human story and every human life in every delicate, intricate detail. And in these innumerable stories, we find ourselves. We can find the threads to weave together into who we each are. We are each totally unique, but the pieces of us, the threads of ourselves, can be found throughout time. We are endless. We are all human because to be human is to share in this fabric of stories, whether we tell them in words or actions, whether they come from us or from those around us. And in these stories, we form connections with others, and we see ourselves reflected back 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways. And we learn that for all that is weird or different or unacceptable, so were so many others. My favorite book series is the His Dark Materials trilogy. In the third book, Lyra finally makes her way to the land of the dead, which is guarded by harpies, trapped there by the authority, taught only to see the wicked and evil in each person. Until Lyra tells them a story. She tells them of her battles in the clay beds, of the sun on the roof of Jordan College, of the wind in her hair on the deck of Egyptian boat. It is with her stories that she convinces them to see the goodness of people. It is with her stories that she asks them to help the spirits instead of torment them. And it is her stories that inspire them to say yes. Because they were true, replied one of them. Because she spoke the truth. Because it was nourishing. Because it was feeding us. Because we couldn't help it. Because it was true. Because we had no idea there was anything but wickedness. Because it brought us news of the world and the sun and the wind and the rain. Because it was true. Because that is the gift of a story, of each and every one of your stories. The gift of life, the gift of hope, the gift of love, the gift of all that is good and simple and profound and sad and true in the world. The gift of your world to someone else. Because as that harpy said, if you live in the world, you should see and touch and hear things. Because that's all life is. The small stories of seeing, of touching, of experiencing. We may not have harpies at the gates of the underworld to impress. We don't all have a paying audience to witness us. We don't all have a willing church congregation to preach our stories at. Thus many stories get bottled up within us. So many of our stories are lost to time, are lost to the rushing pass of days and weeks and years. So many stories lie silently in our souls, in our hearts, because we have no one to witness. Except we do. We have each other. We must have each other. It is vital that we see each other and say, I have a story, please hear it. And that we reply, always, I will witness you, always. Because that is how we grow. That is how the world is formed, and that is how we make connection. I ask that you indulge me in one final story. Late last summer, I went to see Hadestown with my father, my partner. It was a stunning retelling of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, the old Greek tragedy told 1,000 times over, whose ending we know before the story even begins. The first lines of the play are, it's a sad song, it's a sad tale, it's a tragedy. But you hope anyway. As the show goes on, you begin to hope all the same. For some twist, for some interruption of fate. There are 3 of them on stage. Please, someone step in. There is no interruption. There is no help for it. Once again, as a million times before, Orpheus looks behind him just at the last step, and Eurydice fades back into death. Hermes, our narrator, steps up again, somber, to sing us out. It's a sad song. It's a tragedy, he says. It's a sad song, but we sing it anyway. Because here's the thing. To know how it ends and still begin to sing again, as if it might turn out this time, I learned that from a friend of mine. You see, Orpheus was a poor boy, but he had a gift to give. He could make you see the way the world could be, in spite of the way that it is. And in that moment, we are back at the start of the play. Orpheus and Eurydice's eyes meet across the stage, and they fall in love again. And the lights go out, and we are given that gift. We are allowed to see the way the world could be. Because it's not just about the ending. It's about what the story brings to life. Because stories are a gift. And we all have that gift to give. Stories shape the world around us. They form who we are as ourselves and as a human race. Stories unite us. Stories create us. Stories, no matter how big or small, mundane or cataclysmic, help us see all the ways the world could be. They help us see all the ways we can be. They help us see each other truly. So speak your story to all who will listen, and even those who won't. But more importantly, listen. Witness. Hold sacred that moment and be with them entirely for just a moment. For just one warm story.